'cause it's all I've got left. I could cry, I could laugh, all the time that I've got a lineup of cars that afternoon storm in Miami. Yeah.
So much for coming out tonight. I'm super excited to be hosting this event. It's the final book talk of the academic year here at Books and Books, and I wanted to give a shout out to a few people who've made these events so special over the course of the year, and and for many years before this year. And I really want to thank my staff, and particularly Christina Larson, the assistant director at the center, who does so many great things at the center, but is really kind of very much the chief cook and bottle washer for the Books and Books events, and she's just done a fantastic job this year. I also want to recognize Cindy Shamblin Anderson, our graduate fellow, who's also been super helpful this year, and our host of undergraduate assistants. But Lena Hopper is here helping out tonight. Thanks for helping out, Lena. But it's my great privilege and honor to introduce my good buddy and colleague, Ben Lawrence tonight. Ben, as you know, is chair of the Department of Writing Studies and associate professor at UM. He's also the director of the Innovation and Society co-major. Ben's scholarly training is in professional writing and user experience, and he focuses on the intersections of rhetorical theory, community, institutional, and organizational innovation, design, and experiential learning. Now, Ben's first book, Communicating Project Management, a Participatory Rhetoric for Development Teams, was published by Routledge. And he is working on, sounds like a really interesting project as well, another book project co-edited and co-written with Kyle Stedman, forthcoming from the Intermezzo series published by Enculturation. It's a collection called Can I Ask You a Question? Dialogues about sonic rhetorics, professional writing, creative critical scholarship, and process. But tonight we're really going to be focusing on his latest drop, which is really, I'm super excited about this because usually we're just talking about a physical book, right? A physical book artifact that you open and close and there are pages. And this is a little bit different and in I think a fascinating way. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. This is Ben's second monograph, a multimodal text called Hold Me Down, Toward a Rhetoric of Feel, which was published, was it in December, Ben?
Yeah.
Just in December by University of Michigan Press. The text includes an album of original music and reimagines liner notes as a genre to describe how the concept of feel helps musicians to compose songs. The liner notes also reflect on how feel can be used to compose multimodal texts. And I'm sure in many ways, both obvious and maybe less obvious, Ben will be drawing upon his experience as the front man in a band, which is not something I can always say about my academic colleagues. He was the front man for the band, excuse me, No Address, which put out, among other great tunes, When I'm Gone, Sadie, 2005, a great addition to the post-grunge catalog. So, without any further ado, friends, I give you Ben Lauren.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Phil. Thank you for being here. I had jokes prepared. I can't remember any of them now. It's been a long time since I've played in front of people. So I'm glad to be here. And some of the questions that I asked myself preparing for tonight was, what do you wear to an album performance / reading? I really like my shoes. The name of the song is the self-titled song off the album Hold Me Down. sawdust circle around. You knew it wasn't right. Stairs to the attic led me inside. And I'm not filled with rage, a memory cage, but you got no blame. Hold me down 30 years later, but you're still around. You knew it wasn't right. The promise of friendship locked me up tight. And I'm not filled with rage, a memory cage, and you got no blame. I couldn't tell how much I was angry until love came along. I couldn't tell how much I was waiting till love came along. I was anxious and love came along. I was vacant and love said it's wrong. Hold me down 30 years later, but I'm still around. I won't take the blame. I won't feel heartache when I hear your name. I'll think you should be ashamed. You should be ashamed. You should be ashamed. You should be. So Sarah Ahmed wrote, messiness is a good starting point for thinking with feeling. Feelings are messy such that even if we regularly talk about having feelings as if they're mine, they also come at us, surprise us, leaving us cautious and bewildered. I'm a songwriter who ended up studying rhetoric after a career in rock music. My entrance to the field of writing studies was through studying creative writing and teaching first-year writing, which I did during my master's degree. Today, writing studies is my intellectual home because of how the field thinks about composing processes and modes so broadly. Since I'm an untrained musician in the sense that I cannot formally read or write music notation, rhetorical theory has helped me develop a language for thinking about the work I do and have done as a songwriter. Rhetorical theory encourages me to develop a critical engagement with my composing processes, to seek the circulation of my songs as a form of advocacy, and to adopt an ontology for creative critical work that relies on emergence. I also think rhetorical theory can help other quote-unquote untrained musicians and artists try similar moves. I believe rhetorical theory offers a foundation for feeling as a manner of knowing and as an approach to composing. As a singer, it's always been my goal to sound how I feel, and while it's a common goal for musicians to want to have their music heard, maybe on the radio or added to a popular streaming platform playlist, I've always wanted my music to be felt. If people feel my music, then I know it's been heard. I understand songs and songwriting as a method of sharing complex knowledge, but I think the knowledge being shared is done by feeling. The claim I make in these liner notes is that a Rhetoric of Feel offers musicians and writers both new avenues for thinking about the work they create, both in form and function. I enter that conversation by engaging critically with my process for writing this album, Hold Me Down. In this project, approaching the composing process by centering feeling provides an opportunity to describe a rhetoric of feel, which I understand is an approach to composing that can be learned and repeated. Meanwhile, the songs engage with something that happened to me from my past, but the liner notes do not seek to share those details. Instead, the songs share what I'd like to communicate about my experience, and the liner notes share the rhetorical moves I made as part of my songwriting process. In the case for a rhetoric of feel as a compositional approach, I want to be careful here. I disagree that any theory of rhetoric can take the place of formal music training as offered in programs across the world. That's not my claim. Mine's far simpler. A rhetorical theory situated by feel can contribute to how we work in the compositional arts, specifically how we go about being attentive to what we make and how we go about making and performing our ideas and stories through music and other multimodal texts. I make this claim fully aware that rhetoric is a philosophy that seemingly eschews neat definitions and as a result gets formulated into what I believe are too simple and also commonly held notions. For example, rhetoric is to persuade or to inform, and usually towards some sort of unethical end. My use of rhetoric is from the point of view of creative critical scholar, which Ames Hawkins describes as a scholar interested in exploring the sensory and the affective possibilities of research and inquiry, not only in terms of content, but as relevant to the ways we might expand ways of knowing through purposeful creative engagement with new ways to invent and make, to proliferate the possibility for scholarly forms. For me, rhetoric is entangled with imagining hidden possibilities, extending previously held understandings, finding creative means for using storytelling to expose and to intervene in harmful frameworks and in songwriting practice. Further, rhetoric is about following a line of critical inquiry attentive to who or what becomes from a remaking process. In this sense, I understand rhetoric as a guiding philosophy, as providing an invitation to critically remake what is and what is understood, to learn from and by making and recording songs. I believe rhetoric is the conceptual space to explore a concept of feel. Feels there when the song is made, and later it's through rhetoric when you feel the song in your gut and the hairs in the back of your neck stand up. The castle is burning. Burn the castle down. The castle is burning. Burn it to the ground. Watch the hungry siege from a distant throne. Protest righteous anger, the spear surrounds. Fighting for their right. Flash a whisper tiny doubts without fighting yourself. The castle is burning. Burn the castle down. The castle is burning. Burn it to the ground. Don't look away, see what you're made. Your head cannot shake. There is no use in you always pretending there isn't a way. A desperate lie you hide behind, but you must be brave, 'cause we will be brave. 'Cause it cannot be saved. It cannot be saved. It cannot be saved. No, it cannot be saved. So burn it to the ground. 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 In the album version, I scream at the end. Some of the songs have been adapted for here. Here's your teaser to go listen to the record. The song Burn the Castle Down first arrived in a dream in the spring of 2020. In a dream I was singing with a band at a palace, and I was angry with the king for some reason that wasn't clear. The anger was palpable. I was furious. Earlier that day, I'd listened to Who Rottenham on Slick Rick's album, The Art of Storytelling, and I wonder if that song was still my subconscious inspiration. Anyhow, as the band kicked in to Burn the Castle Down, I was screaming the phrase, "Burn it to the ground." Today, that exact part is still at the end of the song. The chord progression's identical to what I heard in the dream. I dreamt about songs before, but I'd never fully composed and conceptualized something during a dream. In the dream, I sang, "The castle's burning" 3 times before I sang, "Burn the castle down." But then the chorus changed a few months later as I worked to figure out the song. As the story goes, one sunny day, my wife and I were sitting together outside, and she listened as I worked on the song. Endlessly. I endlessly work on songs, and she has to bear that. I sang, "The castle is burning," and she immediately sang, "Burn the castle down." Liz's revision was game-changing. Now the chorus moved quickly. The song felt different, angrier, stronger, and more certain. I recognized almost immediately that she'd made it better. Then I started on the verse-bridge lyrics to tell a story about why this castle was burning and why I wanted to let it burn down. I wasn't sure yet. To finish the lyrics for the song, I imagined a king, someone with power over people, fighting a war within himself. He indulges so much in his inner war that he neglects the people he serves. He also confuses his people with his real enemy, his grief, his mental health. The castle metaphor in the song is the king's stronghold. It's what he uses to keep people at a distance and to perpetuate his harmful indulgence. But then the king's people rise up against the stronghold to burn it down. The people are trying to set him free. Burn the Castle Down marks a moment of transformation in the album where going back to what existed before is now understood as impossible. It's meant to be an uncomfortable moment with no resolution. I want listeners to feel as though a war was fought and the stronghold was burned down, but now what? When the song repeats, "It cannot be saved," I mean to usher in a transformation. The word "it" stands for so many parts of my experience and self, but in the song, the object is the castle and all it stood for. What will rebuilding look like now that the stronghold has fallen? Pick or no pick? Pick. Going through the motions in my mind. I'm going through the motions all the time. I got your letter in my heart. It takes me back there to the start. I'm going through the motions in my mind. Duck into an alley break of day, where shadows on the walls don't fade away. 'Cause what I've done I can't forget, and knocks my stomach with regret. I'm going through the motions every day. Going through the motions in my mind. I'm going through the motions all the time. Got your letter in my heart. It takes me back there to the start. I'm going through the motions in my mind. Tired of the waves that someday fall. I see them all, I see them crawl. I'm tired of the waves that you can't call. I see them all, I see them fall. Going through the motions in my mind. I'm going through the motions all the time. Got your letter in my heart. It takes me back there to the start. I'm going through the motions in my mind. Got your letter in my heart. It takes me back there to the start. I'm going through the motions in my mind. 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 I wrote that song while I was hanging Christmas lights on the roofline of our old home in East Lansing, where a fair amount of this record was recorded. It was a nicer day than usual for December, so I was glad to be outdoors with my hands free of gloves, which made hanging the lights a far easier task. I was bending my neck back and clipping the lights on the aluminum fascia one by one, and at some point I'd begun humming a tune to myself. And eventually this melody became the verse of the song, Going Through the Motions. After I was about halfway done with the lights, a neighbor stopped by and I asked her how she was, knowing she'd recently lost a loved one. She remarked, "You know, I'm just going through the motions." Her comment really struck me as being so truthful and vulnerable about what it's like to grieve, whether that's loss of a loved one or the loss of a version of yourself you can no longer get back. After she left, I started thinking about my relationship with my own father. When I'd turned 13, he wrote me a letter about how proud he was of me and who I was growing up to be. I still have that letter today. Then I started singing a chorus to the melody I'd been humming using the phrase "going through the motions." I took out my phone and I sang the melody into the voice recorder, going through the motions in my mind, going through the motions all the time. Probably 30 seconds later, I opened my phone again and sang the next part of the journey of the story forming in my head. I've got your letter in my heart, takes me back there to the start, and going through the motions in my mind. After I finished hanging the lights, I went inside, picked up my guitar, took out my phone, and found the key for the song. I wrote the lyrics to the verse and started working on a bridge, knowing I wanted the song to be mostly chorus. This song was the rare occasion when I knew which direction I wanted it to go in right away. I had the story totally in my head already as I looked back on turning 13 and how it felt to keep a secret. After writing Hold Me Down, I spent a fair amount of time wondering what the follow-up song might be on the album. Hold Me Down creates a kind of emotional vacuum and leaves very little room for the next song to operate. Going Through the Motions became that next song because it topically explained what the next years were like for me. So you want me to leave? I never thought to stay this way. And all this snowdrift melt from rain. The trees make shadows on our feet. So you want me to leave? I never thought to stay that way. There's some changes I should make. Broken branches on the street. Broken branches on the street. And the emptiness has some light in it. Where we find all this laughter. I can understand. It goes hand in hand. We fall back into the pattern. I see why you want me to leave. I never thought to stay this way. And there's some changes I should make. But all the church songs we could sing, but all the church songs we could sing. And the emptiness has a light in it. Where we find all this laughter. I can understand. It goes hand in hand. We fall back into the pattern. And it's not easy like you want it to be. Emptiness has a light in it. Where we find all this laughter. I can understand. It goes hand in hand. We fall back into the pattern. And the emptiness has a light in it. Where we find all this laughter. I can understand. It goes hand in hand. We fall back into the pattern. And it's not easy, but I want it to be. As the sunlight turns to gray, no matter how I plan to change, we're broken branches on the street. We're broken branches on the street. So I turn and I leave. So You Want Me to Leave is a breakup song. But it was written to break up with the way I'd been living and thinking about the work I was doing as an academic and how I was approaching the rest of my life. I've been feeling as if I weren't living but waiting for the right moment to live. In the song, I'm in a dialogue with the universe, if you will, meaning I'm talking to a higher power, whatever, whomever that might be for you. At the time, I felt as if I were being pointed in a different life direction, and I had to make a choice about whether or not I wanted to go. Of all the songs in the album, it's the most representative of where I was emotionally at that moment in my life. When I sang the song, I was not revisiting a period of time from the past. I was singing about the moment I was in. And the song is different from all the others for that reason. Most of the other songs were period pieces in my journey to process and cope with the past, but aside from Hold Me Down, it's the hardest song on the album for me to listen to and to perform. It also is why I placed the song last on the album. It represents both the end of something and the beginning of something else. That last line, "So I turn and I leave," is meant to signify a bittersweet sense of loss and bravery for moving forward and making a hard decision. In hindsight, I wonder if I were also writing about finishing this album. As I referenced in the preface, I didn't read the preface, but I'd gotten to the point of not wanting to intentionally immerse myself in my past much longer. Nick Flynn published a poem called Sudden, where he wrote the line, "A light coming on in an empty room." That image felt so powerful when I first came across it. I imagined a dark room as a metaphor for painful experiences of the past, and light to be something you have to choose to turn on, if you can even find it. The action of turning on a light doesn't require a lot of effort for an able-bodied person, but the choice to turn on a light, the fortune to even find light, is much harder to ascertain. When I wrote the lyrics to the song, I was thinking about Nick Flynn's work, where I recast the dark room as emptiness that had a light in it. In the second stanza of the chorus, I refer to falling back into a pattern, which signaled the challenge of change. I had come to see parts of my journey as having a pattern that was at times very comfortable. Letting go of that pattern felt impossible. So I have one last song, but it's not on this record. But I couldn't not come here and play it. Nobody's ever heard this song before, except for all the people who sit at my house and have to listen to me endlessly write songs. And it's actually when I wrote Hold Me Down, I knew that that was going to be the song that the rest of that record was written about. And when I wrote this one, I knew it was the next one, and it's called Miami. Are there kids in here? No? All right. My head, it's a bit of a mess, don't give it much thought, it's all that I've got. My head, it might just fall off if you see it around, don't kick it too hard. All the time that I've got, a lineup of cars, the skyline is orange in Miami. My heart, it's broken by coast. I could swim through this air, but I want to float. My heart, it's a bit of a mess. It's all I've got left. I could cry, I could laugh. All the time that I've got, a lineup of cars, an afternoon storm in Miami. Oh, Miami, oh, Miami. All the time I have left, all the time is a guess. I can stay with you here, the wind whipping free, the sand at our feet. I just want some peace. Want some peace in big fucking mess, but it's my mess, but it's my mess. Oh, Miami. So part of the liner notes, I was a singer once upon a time in a rock band, as we kind of talked about. So, Phil talked about. And a lot of my thoughts about feel, it's theorized through rhetoric, but it's also through lived experience. So part of what I do in the liner notes is I tell stories about my time being on the road, and sometimes that time helps to further illustrate the concept that I'm talking about in the liner notes. And so the liner notes has a series of vignettes in it. This is the last vignette in the liner notes, and I wanted to read it because I think it's pretty relevant. It's called The Last Next Gig. So No Address played our final gig on September 11th, 2005 in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had already accepted a job at the University of Miami to work part-time in their writing center. Thank you, April. My plan was to fly home that night and wake up the next day and go to work after 9 months on the road. A week earlier, I had done the interview in the back of our bus as we drove through the Blue Ridge Mountains. The show wasn't particularly memorable. We went through the set like a machine processing data. Even though we knew how to play together musically, the relationship between everyone had eroded the way they do when your life becomes unbalanced and full of extremes. I wasn't even capable of mourning the loss of those relationships and wouldn't be ready to take an objective look at it for nearly a decade. My childhood experiences make No Address a complicated form of loss to process. I do remember when we performed When I'm Gone because it felt special. Our energy level was high, and I didn't want the song to end. When it did end, I closed my eyes so I'd never forget the feeling of being on stage as the singer for No Address. It felt like the last time. I thought to myself, remember. I held onto the microphone stand to keep me upright. I opened my eyes and said thank you to the crowd without adding my usual, we'll see you next time. The feeling of walking away from No Address is hard to explain without being a bit cliche or maybe over-emotional. Walking off that stage still haunts me today. And it wasn't the loss of the dream of being in a signed band and making music for a living that I find so haunting, although yes, it can hurt, but life is a series of choices, am I right? It's how life experiences show you who you are and who you're not. For me, avoiding the past only makes me feel more ashamed. The times I've been able to grieve is when I felt most free, even though also most in emotional pain. Afterward, our tour manager helped me pack my stuff. So many books I'd collected on the road. My guitar, a bunch of clothes, a toothbrush. A drawer in the back of the bus slowly emptied of my things. I couldn't say goodbye to anyone, so I didn't. I just got in the car and I left. We drove to the airport in Charlotte and barely talked on the way there. At the airport, our tour manager pulled my duffel bag from the trunk of the car and gave me a big hug that lasted for a bit. He said to the side of my face, "It's been a real treat working with you." It was the last time I ever saw him, even though I still think of him often. Hours later, I landed in Miami and stepped off the plane into humidity that punched me in the chest like an old friend. A new life was waiting for me, and I was going to greet it if I could. The next morning, I woke up and used my last $50 to buy a pair of pants and a dress shirt, in search of an antidote to the humiliation I felt for not being a rich and famous singer, someone better than whomever I was at that moment. I probably should have stayed in bed all day, but I didn't. I was far too anxious and embarrassed to sit still. I parked my car at the gravel lot on the University of Miami's campus just outside the writing center and walked in. My eyes adjusted to the dim room as the air conditioning rattled the paper that was thumbtacked to a corkboard. That was my first step toward making Hold Me Down. It was also my first step toward admitting I needed help to learn how to survive, which would come just several years later. "Hi," I politely said to the person at the front desk, pretending that this was all perfectly usual for me. "I'm Ben, and I'm here for my first day of work." Thank you.
to take a few questions?
Happy to.
Right on. I'm going to grab this mic and we can pass it around so people can hear. Logan's hand is shooting right up. Thank you. I always appreciate when that happens.
Ben, I just want to know when people buy this thing, what is it? How do they do it? Give us like a user guide. We listen, and then we read something. How does it work? What does it look like?
It's open access, and there's a couple ways you can access it. It's on the University of Michigan, it's called Fulcrum. That's their platform. So when I did this, I wanted to publish it open access because that's where I was at. I wanted to do that. And so they have two ways of doing stuff. You can download the album. You can download all the materials. I've got the liner notes designed. Like I had an artist make this, and we spent a long time. You can see the castle. You can see motifs from inside of it. So I played 4 of the 10 songs in the record. When you go to the platform, you can also, they've got like a version of it where you can just kind of click through and you can read through all the liner notes, and then you can listen to each song, which gets embedded in the book itself. Or you can also sort of download it, because one day I have this dream of printing it as like an actual record with like real liner notes insert into it. And so the parts of the liner notes that I read, I didn't read a lot of the theory here. But there's a heavy dose of theory at the beginning. It's just, most people don't want to sit and get deeply into the theory. But there's a whole theoretical part of where I define what a rhetoric of feel is.
Hi Ben, thanks for the performance. My question is, I guess I'm wondering, why did you want to work in the form of liner notes? And were there particular liner notes in the past that have inspired you or given you ideas?
That's a great question. I didn't know that I wanted to make a record. I actually didn't think I would. I think the direction, I'm gonna give a shout out to my friend Bill Hart Davidson. I was eating lunch with him after I was tenured, and I said to Bill, we used to get falafel together, and so we were sitting there, and I was like, so I was tenured. Now what do I do? And he goes, now you make something only you can make. And I was like, huh? What's that gonna be? So I spent a long time thinking through that and kind of experimenting in different directions. And I ended up thinking, what if I made an album? And what can making an album teach us about rhetoric? And that was the initial sort of research question. And so it just kind of, as projects do, it just kind of expanded from there. And I was like, how am I going to theorize this? Because there's no way the field is going to let me publish a record and be like, theory, full professor. So I was like, well, I'm going to have to theorize somewhere. And I have a friend that I worked with, Alex Hidalgo, and she put together a book on computers and composition digital press that was about making films. And so the book was theorizing the documentary filmmaking process from a rhetorical perspective. And she's like, why don't you just do that, except from albums? And I was like, I guess I could, but what would the format be? And I was like, oh, liner notes. So when I started this project, what I did is I found out that Grammys have a series of, like people win Grammy Awards every year for liner notes. I had no idea. And so I went and I bought like a bunch of them that I was like, oh, this one sounds cool. Joni Mitchell's was amazing. Like it blew my mind, the liner notes for hers. And then they had one for Otis Redding. I'm a big fan. They had one for, was it The Replacements? I don't know. That one was really cool if I'm thinking of the right one. Anyway, I went through and I just bought a bunch of them. And I actually, the first chapter of the book when I originally wrote it was a rhetorical analysis of liner notes, and then the editor was like, nobody's gonna care. And I'm glad that it was helpful for you to think about your own, but you could just take that out. And I was like, great, I'll just take that 6 weeks of my life and send it. So that never found an audience anywhere, but that's how I got to it.
Other questions?
Hey, Ben. So I don't know if this is going to get into your theory or not. So, but as you're talking about feelings and your songs are about feelings, it struck me that the most sort of emotional lines of the songs that you played for us were like "Burn the Castle Down," but it was the slowest, gentlest music. Are you contrasting the lyrics and the music in the feeling?
Sometimes, yeah. So one of the big parts of when I'm trying to theorize a rhetoric of feel, there's a couple components. One of them is emergence. And so it's like when you're making something, all of a sudden the thing you're making makes you feel something. And so the author has this moment where they're like reflecting on that. Right? And it's embodied frequently. It's like you can feel it in the pit of your stomach, or you can feel it, in the back of your neck. Whenever I've listened to a song that I find really moving, I'm all of a sudden struck by how much it makes me feel, and not just emotionally, but physically. And so when I'm doing something like that, I also kind of theorize it from the point of view of a performance. And so the point that I'm trying to make there is that sometimes when you're performing an emotive state, like live in front of an audience like this, I might want to scream, because the song "Burn the Castle Down," I actually am screaming at the end of it, "Burn it to the ground," because it's part of there's like a whole violin, it's very orchestrated, it's very loud. But I knew that there's no way I could sit up here and just, with an acoustic guitar, start screaming "Burn the Castle Down." So that was a rhetorical choice that I made to contrast that moment. Instead, I was like, well, what would happen if I brought it down? And I was like, that feels right. And that's how I made the choice. And that's kind of also what a rhetoric of feel is about, is sometimes people in rhetoric, they want to be like, let's classify things really neatly. And I was like, what if we push at the boundaries of rhetoric a little bit and go, what if I can't classify it into a form that has a neat definition, but an emotional one? Then what happens? And so that was why I made that choice. Yeah. But if you listen to the album, you're going to be like, that's a totally different song than the one he played.
There.
I'm not sure it's a question. It's like a barely formed thing. It struck me when you said in the beginning of your presentation, you talked about not being classically or musically trained to read notation, and it was interesting, and it makes me think about this idea of training and expertise. And so I guess my sort of question is there this sort of point where that can get in the way of this idea of rhetoric of feel? And the reason that I'm asking is because I am actually classically musically trained. So I get this with music. I get that there's this separation where it's not that I don't play emotionally if I'm reading Bach or whatnot, and I'm playing the notes. There is emotion there is feel.
Yeah.
There is a musical rhetoric of feel.
Yeah.
But there is a way in which the forms and the notation and the structures get in the way. So if I want to really express something, then I'll switch my sort of brain and I'll play just the key, just the chords, just the tonality, so that I can be more free and have that sort of musical rhetoric of feel. So I wonder, switching over to rhetoric, if there's this way in which that translates to, because I know that you are classically rhetorically trained.
Yeah.
Is there this way in which that translates to, would there be times when training and forms and structure, and I think you actually sort of touched on this with April's question, can kind of get in the way of certain kinds of forms and ways of expressing rhetorically?
Yeah, that's a very good question. One of the people that I when I was making this record, I got really lucky to co-teach a songwriting class for majors and non-majors, and the person I was teaching with, Juliet Hess at Michigan State, is a music ed person, classically trained. And so we've written about the class, we've collaborated on a few different things. She wrote one of the afterwords. There's two afterwords in the liner notes, and she wrote one of them. And she talks about this a little bit, and how there's a vulnerability to relying on feeling that when you're classically trained, you're not necessarily thinking, and you're thinking in the theory. You're like, okay, in this moment we're going to do this, or we're going to try to do that. And so I absolutely think that sometimes over-intellectualizing it gets in the way. Dave Grohl, in I want to say it's like maybe he wrote the preface for this book on John Bonham, and who's a famous drummer, and he says that over-intellectualizing feel makes no sense. It's in your DNA. It's just like who you are. It's how you play. It's how your body's shaped. And I think in moments like that, it is sort of like, can I approach this with a beginner's mindset? Can I forget what my training is? Or am I going to be stuck within those boxes? Fortunately for me, with music, I had no idea what most of the chords I was playing were when I first started out. And people would be like, that makes no sense. How could you play that? And I'd be like, it sounds right to me, though. So oftentimes musicians would want to take the things like the people I worked with in No Address, they were all actually trained, and they would want to take this stuff and make it make sense musically. But sometimes it was also about like, how do we just like ignore that because it sounds right this other way? So yeah, I think with rhetoric that's also true too. Like if I found when I wrote the liner notes there that a lot of the times when I would try to really define something that felt elusive, that it would like somehow ruin it. And so I'd have to pull back on what a rhetoric of feel actually is to make it bigger and a little bit, not ambiguous, but just a little bit more open to different ways of thinking about it. Yeah, that's a good question.
I have a question, Ben. Do you talk about rhetorical listening in the theoretical part of your work?
Yeah, I do. And through Steph Sarasso's work, I start off with rhetorical listening, but she kind of extends the idea of rhetorical listening into, what does she call it? Embodied listening? Because she's getting into multi-sensory rhetorics now. Steph Sarasso published this book, like, Music Never Tasted So Good. And so she published with her students. It's a really good book. It's like they paired food with like playlists. It's kind of fascinating. Anyway, so I do get into listening, and that's kind of where I go with it, is like with a rhetoric of feel. It's like you feel it in your body. So where do you feel it, and how do you know? Like, well, I know because my body is reacting to something. The hairs on the back of my neck just stood up, and so I know that was right. And that's a different way of going, well, I know that was right because I've persuaded somebody towards some end. It's like there's a different kind of feedback, and that's embodied. Yeah.
One more question.
One more quick question. If you were to tell us right before we began reading your work and listening to your album, like one thing that you'd like us to listen for in a sentence, what would it be?
That's a good question. I don't know that I have a good answer, but I would say, one of the things that I'd tell you to do is maybe start with the music, because the rest of it makes sense because of the music, because I wrote the music first. And that was like if we were going to be all researchy about it, the research was the music, and I produced it, and then afterwards I was like, what does this mean? And so it was the experiment, and so then I wrote up the experiment's results, and that was the liner notes.
I saw another hand back here somewhere. Yeah.
This probably is a bit of a strange question, but you've been using the word rhetoric and rhetorical all night, and I honestly would love to know your definition in the context of what we're talking about, of that word.
Yeah, that's a good idea, or a good question. So, one of the things I kind of say a little bit in the liner notes is that the normal ways we think about rhetoric, like to persuade somebody or to inform, isn't something that makes sense to me. I mean, I get it. I understand that that's what people do, and there are reasons for it, and there's the whole, Western canon that talks about it all the way back to the ancient Greeks, and the sophists, and all the rest of it. But I kind of came to rhetoric as a teacher, and for that reason, it made me look at a student that I was working with, for example, and I was like, what do they understand about what we're doing, and what are they not understanding? And what do I have to do to help them get to the aha moment? And it was like a decentering of me as a way to kind of focus on whatever that person needed, right? And that reflection and that attention to emergence became my foundational conceptualization of what rhetoric is. So when I'm making something like a song, I'm asking myself, what does this song need to feel? And it's like, so I might try a direction and be like, that doesn't feel right. And try something else, that doesn't feel right. And then try something and be like, that's what it needs. Or sometimes I'll be sleeping and I'll wake up in the middle of the night. I'm sorry. And I'll be like, that's what it needs. And I will run across to the other side of the house and I'll be, the castle is burning. And she'll be like, I can hear you. But it's like, that's how I think about rhetoric, is I think about it as an emergent process, that as you engage with a text, or you engage with a person, or you engage with a situation or an experience, and you're trying to shape it in some way, you're constantly getting feedback from that. If you're, but it takes some time to kind of sort through it. So I really think about rhetoric from that standpoint of like emergence, like what happens, and so it can sometimes be a little maybe too deductive, I suppose. So I'll be like, let's just try it and see what happens, and then I have full confidence it'll work itself out. Not everybody works that way. Some people need to know what the plan is from the beginning. I'm okay with the plan emerging from the process.
Thank you very much. What is your inspiration, like the source of your inspiration? Like for some poets or some writers, this is nature. For some of them, like a laughter of a children or whatever, or the wave of the ocean. So what is the source of your inspiration?
It depends. For this album, I had just reached a point in my life where I was like doing a lot of processing of the past. And, without going too far down that road, because the way that I situate that in the liner notes is like the songs tell the stories I want to tell in the form I want to tell them, and the liner notes don't do that. They're more of like a theoretical take. I think with this, in this moment, I was just sort of like, I want to process and learn to cope and see what sort of healing is there and what's available to me. But typically, in those processes, what I find is that people and their stories tend to be a big part of my inspiration. And so, one of the things for me is like, when I can connect with people, it's like that is an inspiration. And so it's partially how I go about the world is through that process, because it can inspire songs, but it can inspire all kinds of other things too. And I spend a lot of time thinking about it, and kind of thinking through those kinds of interactions. So like when I talked about going through the motions, that song, it was really my neighbor coming over and saying, I'm going through the motions. And she was talking about the loss of a loved one. And I was just that never left me. I couldn't not think about it. I couldn't put that down. And so that became the basis of a song. And that's often the case for me.
Other questions for Ben?
Thank you all so very, very much.
What a lovely way to close out the book talk series this year. Ben, thank you so much. Normally at this point I sort of give a pitch to go buy the book, but this is a free artifact, friends. And if you just kind of type in Ben Lauren, Hold Me Down, I found it immediately. And I kind of already have pretty far down the rabbit hole, right? And so there's no Sharpie up here because there's nothing that Ben can inscribe, but I'm a Ben Lauren groupie, so I might have to have him sign my forearm or something. So, Ben, thanks for helping us think a little bit about our process and talking about your process.
Thanks, everyone.